Today's video is about the US-China trade war and its impact on one person. Stay tuned. In 2019, Canada became a willing participant in both an escalating trade war and an international incident. Canadian border personnel, guided and supported by the FBI and the US Homeland Security, detained Sabrina Meng, the CFO of Huawei, by arresting her at the Vancouver International Airport. Now, on the surface, it seemed odd that a C-suite executive from China's giant Huawei corporation would be arrested for illegal bank fraud, and that both the FBI and Homeland Security would be on Canadian soil. It also seemed odd that Canada would be asked to hold a Chinese citizen so she could be extradited to the US. The elevating factor that drew global attention is that a sitting US president, at the time Donald Trump, would refer to Mrs. Meng as a bargaining chip. With the US embargo on foreign trade with Iran, Meng was charged with financial fraud by misleading HSBC about Huawei Technologies' business dealings in Iran. How did Meng and Huawei become embroiled in a fraud and extradition case? Well, Meng gave a PowerPoint presentation to an HSBC banker in Hong Kong in 2013 that has been cited as key evidence against her. In that presentation, Meng said that Skycom, a firm that operated in Iran, was a business partner of Huawei, while the United States has described it as an unofficial subsidiary. Meng's lawyers argued that the prosecutors omitted key disclosures Meng made in the presentation regarding Huawei's ongoing business operations in Iran, and that Skycom worked with Huawei in sales and service in Iran. Because the U.S. summary of the PowerPoint omitted the disclosures, it was materially misleading. The U.S. case said that only junior HSBC employees knew of the relationship between Huawei and Skycom. Huawei was one of HSBC's biggest clients, making that claim ridiculous. In fact, new evidence from HSBC shows a senior HSBC employee, aka number 7 in the court case, is a managing director of HSBC and is the same person who has always been in charge of the risk evaluation of Huawei's account in HSBC, including all the KYC, know your customer procedures that are used in business to thwart criminal activity. Now, HSBC's Horus head office reporting information system is their internal customer management system. The records from Horus shows HSBC system was fully aware of the relationship between Huawei and Skycom. According to an agreed document transfer from HSBC via a Hong Kong court, Meng was charged with financial fraud because of her presentation, but that PowerPoint was never submitted to HSBC's Global Risk Review Committee. It further shows that the U.S. ROC, that's their record of case, provided misleading information. The U.S. case that Huawei used HSBC as a conduit for a $900 million loan with Huawei to work with Iran is also flawed. The $900 million credit facility that the U.S. said HSBC had extended to Huawei didn't exist. Huawei was in a $1.6 billion credit arrangement with 26 banks, and HSBC's total contribution was limited to $80 million. The issues were clear to everyone from the very beginning that Ms. Meng, daughter of the founder and CEO of Huawei, was an easy target for the U.S. to put pressure on Huawei to keep them out of the U.S.-dominated high-tech market. Really? And so the trade war began. In March 2018, the U.S.-China trade war actually broke out. By June 2018, the U.S. Congress began to take action against Chinese companies, especially Huawei, This campaign included public statements, letters to the government, lawmaking to expel Huawei from the U.S. market. Then on August 13, 2018, President Trump signed the National Defense Budget Act to prohibit the federal government from purchasing Huawei equipment. It certainly looked like a dynamic escalation by the U.S. to keep China out of North America. Huawei had begun a 5G deployment with sales and an implementation program in Western countries, including the U.S. Huawei was getting kudos from its robust technology. The U.S. feared that China would soon dominate the tech market, not only with their more advanced 5G, but other technologies as well. While the U.S. economy, culture, and politics is diminishing in power in the eyes of the world, they still want and demand world dominance in most aspects of technology. The greatest country in the world does not want to lose a trade war. With Trump's nationalistic policies, he had tried to retain its self-proclaimed leadership position in the world. It was hoped that when Biden took office, his policies would be more collaborative and this obvious trade war would be replaced by cooperation. Not so. While the U.S. was infighting on infrastructure funding, the Chinese were putting billions into their high-tech industries. If China wanted to dominate the high-tech market and with quality equipment, they were putting their money where their mouth was. Is Meng a pawn in a trade war? According to the Washington Post in July 2021, President Trump gave the Chinese ample reason to regard Meng as a pawn in a larger power play. Asked by Reuters during a December 2018 interview whether he would intervene with the Justice Department in Meng's case, Trump answered, "Whatever's good for the country, I would do." He said that if he decided her release would produce a big trade deal with China, I would certainly intervene. This sounds like transactional quid pro quo to me. This impression is reinforced by former National Security Advisor John Bolton, who writes in his memoir, The Room Where It Happened, that Trump describes Meng as the Ivanka Trump of China and seemed sympathetic to releasing her if he could get concessions from the Chinese. The case against Huawei's CFO is an abuse of the extradition process based on omitted facts and a U.S. foreign policy directives. On June 3, 2021, Biden made an executive order allowing the U.S. to use financial weapons against Chinese companies it deemed a national security threat. It stated that the investors could no longer buy new securities in these companies on American markets starting from August 2, 2021. And existing U.S. investors were given a year to divest their holdings. Canadian deportation cases have been known to drag on for years, some a decade. How can the U.S. in good conscience continue to fight Meng's deportation to the U.S. in light of this HSBC evidence? The U.S. has raised the game with executive orders against Chinese companies that showed it might against a professional woman in custody in Canada. The Chinese government will not back down in the case of Huawei. The documents released in Hong Kong in April 2021 clearly show a different picture than what the U.S. is arguing in Meng's case. Canadian prosecutors were trying to ban publication of the new documents, but the trial judge denied their application. So what's the Canadian perspective? In my opinion, the U.S. has placed Canada in an untenable position with the Meng case. It has caused a major disintegration of what was a friendly relationship between Canada and China while making Canada look like a puppet for the U.S. If the Meng case was strictly based on the law without foreign intrusion, it would have been settled the first day of court. It also clearly exposed a flawed extradition policy based on the 1999 Extradition Act No. 6. The new law went too far in accommodating foreign states, said Dalhousie law professor Robert Curry. Canadians are shaking their heads on this one because the current legislation puts far more power in the hands of the Minister of Justice, who is clearly playing a political game of appeasement to the USA. The facts will set you free. Really, the U.S. will have a lot of explaining to do in the next court day with Ms. Meng. Evidence that clearly would not hold up in a U.S. court seems to hardly be evidence in a deportation hearing in Canada. The people know this, Meng prosecution is part of the trade war, so do the lawyers, the courts, and the U.S. government. But no one wants to make the first move. At a time when U.S. foreign policy is bereft of reason, perhaps it's time the U.S. shows some diplomacy. Throwing stones at each other will not stop two giants from seeking hegemony. However, if the U.S. shows an attempt at making peace with China, it may go a long way with returning diplomacy and common sense to a nonsensical situation with Meng. If the U.S. can show that it does believe in the human rights and that it won't use petty criminal allegations, the U.S. will see the value of ceasing the prosecution of Meng and move on to some collaboration to lower tensions in a much stressed world. The Meng deportation case has gone on far too long. Whew. That's my rant, my rant for today. Please like this video and subscribe for more thought, facts, and ideas about business.